Hello, everyone, and welcome to this FR in Focus webinar. My name is Martin, and I'm part of the team that provides student support here at ACCA. This session today is designed to support your preparation for the financial reporting exam. And for that, I'm very pleased to be joined by expert tutor, Cara Barrett. And before we kick off, I'd just like to cover a few housekeeping items for you. There are a number of buttons that you can use in the course of this session. You'll find a help icon on the left, which provides resources and information to you to help you resolve any technical issues that you might experience. There are also icons for the slides and the media player, and you'll need to see both of these during the webinar. So please ensure that you've selected them. There is an attendee chat function, which will enable you to engage with fellow webinar attendees. And that icon is on the right-hand side. We also have a list of available resources. You'll see an icon that looks like a file symbol. And if you click on that, you'll be able to access the resources that are relevant to today's webinar, including the direct links. You can rearrange your screen to suit you and resize the windows if you need to. And if at any point you can't hear what we're saying or you can't see any visuals, please do refresh your browser. If you've registered for this webinar, it means you'll be sent an email tomorrow with details of how you can listen to it again. So don't worry if you miss anything or if you have any technical issues, as you'll be able to access the recording. I'm going to hand over to Cara in a moment. And if you'd like to ask ACCA or Cara a question, then please click on the Q&A button, which is on the lower end of your screen, and put in your question there. So please note, we may not guarantee responding to everyone directly, either verbally or via web chat, but we hope that the questions we share will be helpful to everyone. So welcome once again, and now over to you, Cara.
Thank you very much, Martin, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are, to everybody out there. Let's start then by me just introducing myself, because you might not have come across me before. As Martin said, my name is Cara Barrett. I have been teaching students like yourself, but also teaching tutors who teach you for many, many years now, more than 23 years there, which makes me sound very old, doesn't it? I also work with various accountancy institutes throughout the world to help them develop their qualifications and learning materials. So that's just a little bit of background. Let's talk about what we're going to do today, though, what we're going to discuss. So in our agenda, first of all, I am going to be pointing out how you can use the examiner's report really to your advantage, and we will just be looking at the latest examiner's report to help us discuss that. I'm going to give you a sneak preview of the new pre-September mock exam, and I'm also going to give you some top tips for the time that you have remaining in the run-up to your real exam. And we'll also just talk briefly about ACCA's Study Hub, which is now available to all. At the end there, as you can see, we have a Q&A session. As Martin said, we probably won't get through every single question that's submitted, but I will do my best to pull together those common questions so that I can share them with you. But let's start with the examiner's report and what you can learn from the examiner's report and really why it's important to you, how it can help you. So the first thing I think to discuss there is where you find that examiner's report. And actually, as it says on the slide, not only the reports, but loads and loads of really, really useful resources. So you can see there's a screenshot there from a web page in ACCA's website. Hopefully you're familiar with that. That's the FR part of the ACCA website. And as you can see, there's a list of various resources there. So what you're particularly looking for is down at the bottom there, the Examiner's Reports tab. If you click on that tab, you will be able to access examiner's reports back to the September-December 2020 sitting. Remember, the examiners treat sittings as hybrid sittings, so September and December are lumped together, and then March and June are lumped together for the purposes of reports. So loads of reports to look at, which is really, really useful for you. But whilst I'm pointing out what's on the website, let me also just mention That new mock that I've spoken about, it's available on the practice platform, but you can access it from this very, very same page on the FR part of the website. So please make sure you do that, but I'll talk more about that later. Back to the examiner's reports though, and how they are useful, because you might not have seen one, you might not have discovered these yet. So what's in them? Well, first of all, it seems pretty reasonable that the examiner's report is structured in the same way as your exam. So it refers to Section A, Section B, and Section C. Now, what we have in the Section A part of this report is 4 OTQs that the examiners have identified as being challenging for the students that sat them. Now, remember, OTQs aren't generally published. They are in the examiner's report. So that's a really, really useful resource in its own right. So those OTQs are published together with commentary on them. In terms of Section B, in your exam, you know you have 3 mini case studies. Well, the examiners have selected one of those mini case studies and the attached 5 questions. They've selected a challenging question, something that students found difficult, and again, have walked through with commentary. In terms of Section C, we have detailed commentary of 2 of the Section C questions. So 1 analysis question and 1 accounts prep question, as you will see in the exam. And again, the examiners have selected ones that they think are useful. Now, what should you do with those? I think in terms of those OTQs, have a go. Don't just sit and read the examiner's report, actually have a go at them. So there are 9 OTQs, do them to time, and then go back and use the examiner's report to mark them and debrief them. Then you're learning from the whole process. In terms of Section C, those are the questions that are published on the practice platform. Go into the practice platform, do the questions, use the self-mark function on the practice platform, and then read the examiner's report to help you understand where you could have got marks, where you might have gone wrong, and so on. So really, really useful, this report, as I say. In terms of what you can learn, I think we could say 2 aspects. First of all, you can pick up some really good technical pointers in the examiner's report. So for example, you can pick up requirements of IFRS standards. If students haven't done something so well, the examiner will explain with reference to the requirements of the standards. You can pick up what your fellow students, what candidates do well and do not so well. And you need to make sure that if other people can do something well, you can do it well. You also would be in a great position if you know that students generally don't do so well at a particular aspect, if you make sure that you do. So you rise above the general cohort. So it's really useful to know how other students feel and face these exams. You can pick up their common mistakes to make sure you don't make those mistakes. And of course, you can see how particular topics are examined. So that's technical information. What about technique? Well, in terms of technique, the examiner will often give commentary that helps you understand the best approach to a question, particularly true for Section C questions, actually, that is. You can also pick up some ideas on how to write your answer. Again, that's very relevant to Section C. And you can understand how marks are given, again, often within Section C. So what I'd like to do now is I would like to move on into the actual examiner's report, the most recent one. But what I've done here is I've recorded a little video for you to watch in which I am going through the examiner's report on the ACCA website. So that also gives me an opportunity now to just dart into the background and start answering some of those questions that have been coming in. So if you want to keep those questions coming whilst you watch this, that would be fantastic. So into the video now, and then we will regroup and move on to the mock exam. So let's have a look at the March-June 23 examiner's report and see how it can help you as you move forward towards your exam. And before we get into the detail, just to point out the layout here, this is a 24-page report. This is the contents page at the very start. As you can see there, we have a section A, section B, and then two sections C, really areas dealing with each of those longer questions. So let's jump in to section A. Well, as expected, 4 of the most challenging questions are covered in the Section A part of the report. I've just picked one of those to talk about, and that's the question on the screen now. Here, just to give you the background, we have a company which has investment property. It has previously measured those properties at cost or using the cost model, and it's just moved to the fair value model with fair values being greater than previous carrying amounts, so there's been a gain and no change to the useful life of those properties. And you're asked what the effect of the change in accounting policy is on the financial statements. And if you look at the options there to select from, they basically revolve around 4 things: the operating profit margin, gearing, other comprehensive income, and profit before tax as an absolute figure rather than a margin. So just to quickly take a step back and think about the effect of the move to the fair value model on each of those. Operating profit margin will, of course, increase, and that's because we have a fair value gain recognised in profit or loss. It's going to be offset by a little bit higher depreciation charge, but it's not going to be completely offset, so overall that margin will increase. Gearing will decrease, and that's because there is no extra debt, but there is going to be extra equity because there's going to be extra retained earnings by virtue of having this fair value gain within them. Other comprehensive income is not going to be affected because investment property isn't recognised, isn't reflected in OCI. And then profit before tax, of course, for the same reasons as the operating profit, will increase. So looking at those options, the correct answer is, of course, C. But what can we learn from the examiner's report here? Well, if I scroll down, you can see this really quite standard format that the examiner uses. He first of all thinks about what the OTQ tests, then what the correct answer is, and then if I just scroll down, where candidates went wrong. So what can we pick up here? Well, I think the first thing you can pick up is actually from the question itself, and that is the style of question, and in particular, the way in which ratios might be examined within OTQs. This style of question, I would say, is probably more likely than one in which you are just simply asked to calculate a ratio and given the figures. What else can we learn here? Well, if you weren't sure about investment property accounting, the first thing that we have here is the technical point that the fair value increase should be recognised in the statement of profit or loss. So we have a learning point within there. You also have, if I just scroll down here, under the heading, what is the correct answer, a really nice kind of walkthrough explanation from the examiner of why the operating profit margin would increase. And of course, that means why PBT would increase as well, and why gearing would decrease. So we often see that in these OTQs, a really nice explanation, a really full explanation from the examiner. So that is great in terms of helping you to learn. And then the final thing that I think, if I scroll down, is really useful here is to understand where candidates went wrong with this question. And of course, that's important because you want to make sure that you don't make mistakes that candidates have made before. And as you can see here, most believed that actually fair value increases should go to OCI. So some great learning points coming out of that question in terms of both technical pointers and technique pointers, how to approach the question, how to think about the impact of accounting treatments on different ratios. I did say I'm not going to go into detail on the other questions that are included in the report from section A. Please do have a go at them and then read the examiner's report and learn about technical issues, learn about technique pointers. Let's move on to section B. In the part of the report that deals with section B, the examiner will always choose one of the cases and its accompanying 5 questions to walk through. So as you can see here, the case here that's been selected deals with IFRS 5 and IAS 33. It is a multidisciplinary or a multi-standard case study. Don't forget that some section B questions deal with only one topic and some could deal with 5 because there are 5 questions, so very multidisciplinary. So here we just have the 2 to think about. If I scroll down, you can see that you are presented with the scenario, and then that is followed with each of the questions attached to the scenario. And yet again, we've seen this in section A, the examiner covers what does this test, what's the correct answer, and where did candidates go wrong. So just in the same way that we've seen previously, you can use this report to pick up some technical points, to pick up some technique points, to understand what mistakes others have made that you do not want to make. But one thing that I just want to pull out in particular from this section B case study is how a case study that concentrates on 1 or possibly 2 standards can really dig into that standard and test different elements of it. So here, for example, one of the standards we've seen was IFRS 5 that was going to be examined. And the first question, you can see there, it deals with the definition of a discontinued operation. The second question deals with disclosure of a discontinued operation. And the third question in the series of 5 deals with the measurement of a discontinued operation, in this case a division. So you can see that the examiner has used this case study to delve quite deeply into IFRS 5 and is examining definitions, is examining disclosure, and is examining calculations. And we see that kind of approach quite a lot. Now, what this means to you as somebody sitting the exam is that it's really dangerous to cherry pick parts of standards that you think are important and other parts that you think are less important. So I think that one thing that many of us are guilty of, for example, is neglecting disclosure requirements in favour of concentrating on calculations. And actually, if I just scroll down to the examiner's comments to question 3, that was our calculation question, sure enough, you can see there under the heading, where did candidates go wrong? Most candidates actually got this right. So just because you can do calculations, it doesn't necessarily put you ahead of your peers within your cohort, within your exam cohort. However, if you know other aspects of standards such as disclosure, that may well put you ahead, because if I just scroll back to the previous question, our disclosure question, where did candidates go wrong? Well, without the knowledge of required disclosure, most candidates selected A, and as you can see at the top of the page there, the correct answer is D. So the examiner is effectively saying candidates did not know this answer. But again, as usual, we do have the learning point included within this report, and you have got the disclosure requirements given to you so that you can reacquaint yourself with those. Equally, if I just scroll back to the first question in the series, and of course, remembering that, again, this question was not calculation, this was definitions, you can see again that most candidates selected option C, but actually the correct answer was option A. So yet again, if you want to lift yourself above the general cohort, if you want to give yourself the best chance of passing, then a good approach is to make sure you know beyond the calculations. Now, that particular question I'm not going to look at in more detail. It has a slightly tricky learning point in it, but as usual, the examiner has explained that really, really nicely in this report. So have a go at the question before you read that. Let's now think about section C in the report, though. Well, in the section C part of the examiner's report, the examiners have selected 2 long questions from those March and June 23 sittings. As you can see, one Vroom is an analysis question and the other Sphinx is an accounts prep question. The analysis question is in a group scenario. The accounts prep question is in a single entity scenario. Now, suffice to say, within the report dealing with those 2 questions, the examiner does give you lots of really useful technical tips, particularly in terms of accounts prep. He shows you some workings, for example. But at this stage, it's not useful for me to talk about those with you because, of course, those are best looked at when you've actually had a go at the questions. So what I want to do here is I want to concentrate on those more general points that you can learn from and take forward and apply whenever you do an exam, including, of course, your final exam. So let's think first of all about vroom, which was our analysis question. And I have just highlighted with a red box the general points that I think are really useful to take forward. So the first thing there that the examiner says that I've highlighted is that most candidates didn't do too well actually on this question, and that was largely due to poor exam technique. So here are a couple of things in particular. First of all, candidates didn't address the requirement, and secondly, they didn't use information in the scenario. So two important things to take forward there. Make sure you answer the question that has been asked. You can help yourself to do that by structuring your response using headings that reflect the requirement. So for example, if you're asked to discuss position and performance, have a heading for position and a heading for performance, and then make sure that you write about each of those topics under the heading. Not using the information in the scenario, this is often a problem. During the learning phase for financial reporting, it's really common to learn the ratios and think about some plausible reasons for movements. But actually, don't just regurgitate those plausible reasons for movements in your exam. Think about the specifics of the business that you have been presented with. Now, if I just scroll down, the next point that I want to pull out here is in relation to the ratios that you were actually asked for. And as you can see there, the examiner has said that candidates could do the first two of those, the simpler ratios, but ROCE actually was a problem for some candidates who either didn't bother or did it incorrectly. And as the examiner says there, it's really important you are familiar with and you practice all ratio calculations, not just the easier ones. An equally important point is the second box there. Some candidates continue to exclude workings for ratio calculations, and the examiner said it here why it's really important. If you don't have a working and you calculate the wrong amount, you will get no marks. However, if you calculate the wrong ratio and you do provide a working and you've just made a silly error with the maths, with the calculator, then you could actually get full marks. So help the markers to give you some marks. They do want you to pass. Let's scroll down again. The next point just reiterates something we've said, and that is you must be specific to the scenario and avoid generic comments. But also, notice there, increasingly candidates are copying and pasting the scenario into their answer. Now that can't possibly score you any marks because it is not your own work. So please do not do that. Refer to it, don't copy and paste it. That second red box there on the page as well, brief analysis provided in some cases or none whatsoever. Now this could be an issue with time management, so really important technique point there. Calculate your time, 1.8 minutes per mark, stick to it. When time is up, move on. That ensures you have time to cover everything. And the very last thing from the examiners on this particular question is a simple point, a really easy mark. When you're doing analysis, provide a conclusion. Make sure it's linked to the actual requirement, make sure it's relevant, but provide a conclusion and you're going to get a mark for it. And just so the marker doesn't miss it, make sure you give it a heading, conclusion. Let's finish by thinking about the second question, Sphinx. This was accounts prep. Most of the points here in the report are actually to do with technical issues, but if we just concentrate on some of the technique points, and in the main, those relate to your approach to this kind of question. So the first box I have highlighted there, lay out your financial statement, so statement of changes in equity, statement of financial position within your constructed response area. So get those in place first, your empty pro formas. Notice also in the same box, leave some space between each working, each statement. I would also say leave some space between each line in the statement so you can go back and fill things in so the marker can easily see what's going on. Once you've done that, the second box that I've highlighted there from the examiner, work through the adjustments, but really importantly, work through them in an order that suits you. So deal with the easiest ones first. That means you are grabbing the easy marks first rather than getting bogged down in the harder stuff. When you are doing that, if I just scroll through all of the technical explanations provided by the examiner in the report, the very last point that's made here is to make sure that you do transfer all trial balance amounts into your workings or into your final statements. Those are super easy marks and half marks to grab, so please, please don't miss them. Tick them off, highlight them, strike through, whatever, as you use each TB amount. So we have quite a lot of useful information in the examiner's report, certainly some technique points there, but for all those technical points I've jumped over, please, please have a go at this exam on the practice platform and then go back and revisit it to learn from the technical points. Okay, well, I hope you found that video useful. I don't know if anybody spotted my little error. I thought I was talking about revaluation property. I did refer to investment property at fair value being depreciated. It is not, of course. So I do apologise for that. I was in my head talking about something different. Right, what I'd like to do though now is I would like to just move on, and I would like to think about this pre-September 23 mock, because this is going to be part of your preparation, hopefully, for your real exam, and I think it's going to be really useful to you. So it did go live on the practice, or it is going live on the practice platform today, I should say, but what's a sneak preview? What can you expect from it? Well, it will be laid out exactly the same as your actual exam. And this is one of the questions, funnily enough, that I've just answered whilst you were watching the video from one of you out there. Will the mocks mirror the real exam? In terms of format, absolutely they will. Section A, B, and C, Section C, an accounts prep, an analysis question. In terms of content, we have absolutely no idea what is going to be on your real exam, and therefore we are absolutely not in a position to try and create a mock or develop a mock that might mirror your real exam. So please don't expect technical content, technical topics to be the same, just to put that warning out there. They could be anything in your syllabus when the real exam rolls round. In terms of your mock though, thinking about section A, we have massive coverage of topics here. You are going to see questions on leases, impairment, ratios, everyone's favourite financial instruments, consolidation, accounting concepts, earnings per share, revenue. Massive coverage. That's exactly how the examiner uses OTQs to get coverage of the syllabus. Now, within those OTQs, in the mock exam, you'll find that there are 9 which are pretty numeric, so lots of calculation, and then there are 6 which are wordier. Again, that tends to be how OTQs pan out in your real exam. There's a real mixture. If they were all calculations, it would be very, very difficult to fit them into the time that you're allowed or the time that you should be allocating yourself. So you will find some wordier ones, you will find some harder calculations, some easier calculations. A really good approach there is for you to do the ones that you can do quickly, find easiest first, and then go back to the ones that you think might be a bit more time consuming, making sure you don't run over on your total time. In terms of section B, in our mock, we have obviously 3 scenarios. They are all multidisciplinary. None of them are one standard only that they're based on, but do be aware you might see that in your real exam. You might see a case study which is only on one topic. But in this case, we have a mixture there, financial instruments mixed with EPS, intangibles mixed with business combinations, and IFRS 5 mixed with provisions. Again, you will see there that there is a mixture of calculations and wordy questions. Again, you will probably find some easier than others. So again, within a particular mini case study, do whichever of the 5 questions you find easiest first and then go back to the others. But I would treat each case study as a separate question, really. Don't be darting between the 3. Do note as well the last 2 bullet points in red there. Every single OTQ in a section B scenario is standalone. In other words, none of them rely on you getting the correct answer to a previous OTQ within that mini case study. So they're all completely standalone. And some of them you will find don't require information from the scenario. It's more a case of asking you about your knowledge. So be ready to deal with those. And actually, often they can be dealt with quite quickly. What about section C? Well, you have two questions, Dorrit and Griffin. And as we know, one of those questions is always going to be accounts prep. One of them is always going to be analysis. We also know that in either case, they could be based on a group scenario or a single entity scenario. You will tend to get one group and one single entity. In this case, the accounts prep question is consolidation, and the analysis question is single entity. They could be the other way around in another exam, though, remember. In terms of the accounts prep, in this particular question, they will be looking for extracts from the consolidated SOFP and then a full statement of profit or loss, consolidated, of course. You're very unlikely in the accounts prep question to have to prepare both in full. That is too time consuming, but this is an approach that the examiner will often use, extracts of one, so something normally quite meaty like goodwill from the CSOFP or retained earnings, that kind of thing, a meatier number, and then the other item in full. In terms of Griffin, our analysis question, as is common, in a lot of these questions, there are a few marks to start with going for calculating some ratios. The majority of the marks, however, are going for the written analysis. Now, one problem that we often see from students is concentration, over concentration here on the calculations. Make sure that you stick to time on those calculations and move on to the written analysis. Get the bulk of the marks in the written analysis. In this case, they're asking for position and performance, so don't forget to think about your exam technique ahead of time. So think about things like having a heading for position, having a heading for performance. So a little bit of a sneak preview there, just so that you know what's coming up, so that you're ready for it, so that you can be in the best mindset to do as well as you possibly can in that mock, and of course get the most out of it. When you have done that mock, by the way, there are debrief videos available. I have recorded debrief videos for the sections of the mock there, so you can watch those after you've self-marked, just to help pick up some approach tips, technique tips, and what have you. Now, in a general sense, your exam's not that far off now. What should you be doing? What are my top tips in the run-up to your FR exam? And again, this is actually a question that I was asked that I've just picked up whilst you're watching the video. So what would I be doing? Well, I think there are three things that you need to get on top of right now whilst you've still got time. The first of those things is the technical content, really the technical content of the syllabus, the accounting standards, if you will. How should you do that? Well, I think at this stage in the game, it's great to have a little revision summary. I think a lot of people find that useful. You might be provided with those. You might be able to buy those, obtain those in the form of study cards, revision cards. If you don't have those, there is nothing wrong with grabbing a sheet of A4 paper and jotting down the key parts of, let's say, IAS 37 on provisions or IFRS 15 on revenue, so that you have your personal revision summary. You can also, for technical pointers, read examiners' reports and examiners' articles. So we've seen reports, we've spoken about those. Examiners' articles, available also on the FR part of the website, deal with technical topics. And it's a chance to look inside the examining team's mind, because they write those articles on specific technical topics, and you can pick up some tips. So that's the first thing to get on top of, the technical content, but that's not the only thing that this exam is about. The second thing to get on top of is the software you're going to be using. You need to be really, really comfortable with that when you are in your exam. And the way to do that in the first place is to use the support resources that are available from ACCA. Again, you can access those from the FR part of the website. But as well as that, get into the practice platform and just have a go. You don't even necessarily have to go in and think, I'm doing an exam to time. Just go in and start playing with it. Start navigating your way around an exam, or start looking at that. There's empty constructed response areas that you can access. Start just using them and getting used to typing things, moving things around, whatever. So get on top of the software. Third thing to get on top of, crucial, exam technique. How can you learn about exam technique at this stage in the game? Well, again, ACCA has provided a lot of exam technique support material, which is available to you via that FR page. So have a look at what's available. Now, all of those things I've got there is a case of you going and looking at something to in effect learn to get on top of the technical content, the software, the exam technique. But once you've done that, there's absolutely nothing that beats having a go, practicing over and over again. So when you feel confident with your technical content, your technique, your CBE software, get stuck into practice questions, get stuck into the practice exams. We've got the past exams, practice exams, specimen exams. There's loads of exams on the practice platform. Have a go at them. Do them to time. Make it worth your while. Now, just to talk a little bit more about the practice exams there, the practice questions, what your approach should be. I've already said do it to time. That's crucial because we know that come the real exam, often students who fail are those who have not allocated their time correctly and have got to the stage where actually I've run out of time. I've not managed to do one of the questions in section C, or I've not managed to do the analysis written requirement. I've only just grabbed some marks from calculating ratios. Right, you must have a stab at every question. You will gain more marks from starting a new question in section C afresh and grabbing the easy marks than you will from dragging out the previous question, trying to get the harder marks. So move on, be very disciplined about that. So practice to time, practice under exam conditions, by which I mean ask people not to interrupt you, turn your phone off or put it out of the room. Don't have your books there. You can't look at your books in your real exam, so don't have them to turn to. Just exam conditions is going to be your best bet. And practice, if you possibly can, on the software that's available to you on the practice platform. Now, it's all very well practicing questions, practicing exams, but you know what? That's not enough. What you have to do is come out of the other end of your practice exam or question and work with it. Work with that exam and learn from it. So that is going to mean, for example, using the self-mark function on the practice platform to mark your paper. Debrief. Use the model answer to debrief what you've written. So you might be able to pick up some tips, things that, oh, I should have got that and I didn't, that sort of thing. Read the examiner's report if you are attempting one of the real past hybrid exams. As I've said, you'll find those examiner's reports. So go through that extra process. Don't do the exam and stop. Go through the extra process. What you will then be able to do is feed anything you've learned from that process back into your knowledge. And once you're growing that knowledge up, you're in a position to practice again and do better. And you will gradually improve. You'll learn from your mistakes. And then, of course, when you get around to doing your real exam, you're in the best possible position. So practice, but do it wisely, really is the message there. Now, when it comes to exam day, what are my top tips then? Well, I think number one is to keep calm. It's really easy to get in a bit of a tiz, isn't it, on an exam day? So just keep calm, deep breaths, and remember those key rules. Stick to time, attempt all questions. Do make sure, of course, that you signpost your marker through anything that you are doing as well in terms of section C. Remember to read the question very, very carefully and answer the question. So it's very, very common, particularly in analysis questions, for students to answer the question they might have liked to be asked. Don't you be the person that does that. Answer the question you have been asked. So be very, very careful. And of course, Overall, overarching everything, remember that very, very good exam technique. Things like how you write things, make it short, sharp, easy to read. In terms of the analysis question, something we've just picked up from the examiner's report over and over again, make sure that you use the scenario. That's good exam technique. Don't just really repeat things that you've learnt in class, but actually make it relevant to the scenario. In terms of your accounts prep question, use workings, signpost your marker to those workings, make it really, really clear to them. Now, you're going to put yourself in the best possible position to secure your pass if you do all of those things. Now, let me just, before we go on to Q&As, let me just touch on ACCA's Study Hub, which you may or may not be aware of. The Study Hub, you can see there, it is a digital platform. It gives everyone, all students all over the world, no matter where you are, free access to learning materials. So what you've got there, what you can use, as you can see, study content, so the equivalent of texts in effect, the equivalent of question banks. There are short quizzes, flashcards, which are in effect an aid memoir or a revision aid, practice and revision questions. So as well, of course, as what's available on the practice platform, you can use those questions. If you want to write the answer in the practice platform, you can use the constructed response area of the practice platform, which isn't attached to a particular exam. So do that as well. So loads of fantastic resources. And as you can see there, you can access it via my ACCA within the My Qualifications section. And as it says, select my ACCA Study Hub. But what we have now is just a very, very short video on that Study Hub. And then we'll come back together and we will have a look at some questions that have been coming in, and I can answer them for everybody so that we can all learn from what everybody's asking. Here's that short video first, though.
Let's take a closer look inside Study Hub, your ultimate study resource. It's a digital hub. Study Hub gives you online access to study materials from ACCA. It works like an ebook with added interactivity. It's a knowledge hub. Study chapters help to increase your understanding. A visual overview shows all the topics in each chapter, so it's easy to see how they link up. It's a revision hub. End of chapter quizzes put your knowledge to the test. The multiple choice questions are automatically marked so you can review your performance. Flashcards test your knowledge of key definitions. Check your answer against the definition on the reverse of the card. Practice questions help you prepare for your exams. You can instantly compare your answers to the suggested solutions. It's an anywhere hub. Whenever and wherever you want to work, Study Hub is there on web and mobile. It's a success hub. 79% of students said Study Hub made them more confident. 90% said they would use Study Hub again. Use Study Hub to help boost your progression. Just go to your My ACCA account and click on the Study Hub link.
Excellent, fantastic resource there that, as I say, is available to you completely free of charge. So why not use that? That's a fantastic resource. Okay, what we will do in our last between 15 and 20 minutes there is address some of the questions that have been coming in. So of course, some of these, as I've said already, when you watched the longer video earlier, I addressed them individually, but some of those I'd like to share with the wider group. And I think we've also had some other questions come in whilst I have been talking. So let me just pull up my questions and then I will start running through them and see what we can share with you that's going to be useful. Excuse me. Okay, so in no particular order here, a question that's come in: do we need to show workings for section A and section B? And the answer to that is no, absolutely not. Section A and section B are marked by a computer. No human sees them. So the workings that you might do and you might need to do, and that's absolutely fine, but they will not be shared with any marker, anybody on the examining team. They will not be seen in effect. So all that you have to concentrate on is ticking the box, a multiple choice box, or the select 2 from 5 box, or writing the answer in the box, whatever it may be. But no, absolutely no workings, but you can do them. You should do them if necessary, of course. Okay. Do we know within section C, where we have an accounts prep question and an analysis question, do we know which will be for group, which will be for single entity? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. It could be either way around. So it's quite important really there for you to practice versions of both. So accounts prep, consolidation, and single entity, kind of a TB format you normally get, and then a list of adjustments to make. And then for analysis, practice analyzing group accounts, analyzing single entity accounts, because it could be either, as I say. This is a great question. I get this one a lot. When you use the spreadsheet function for your answer, should you detail the calculation, or should you just do it within the cell, use a formula in effect, and then expect the marker to pick up the formula? Now, what I always say here is that markers are trained to interrogate the cells. However, two things. First of all, let's make life as easy as possible for our marker. So I would actually bracket, let's say it was a consolidated cost of sales, I would actually bracket the working, the parents plus the subs minus intercompany or whatever. But I think the other massive benefit of that approach is that you can actually use text as well as numbers. So you could, for example, write next to your minus the intercompany trading, you could write ICO, so that the marker can see exactly what you're doing. Now that becomes more important if you're dealing with an unrealized profit. So URP I would put there. Why is it more important there? Because an unrealized profit generally needs a calculation. And often you will get, say, let's say half a mark for the calculation, then half a mark for actually putting it into the right place. Now, if you get the calculation wrong, so you have the wrong number, but you do the right thing with it, you can still access what's called own figure rule marks for putting it in the right place. Now, if you've got the wrong number, though, the marker doesn't necessarily know what that number is. But if you've written URP next to it, they do. So you're giving them an extra signpost. So in simple answer, please write out the calculations on the face of the spreadsheet, even if you're using the formula within the spreadsheet cell to calculate it, which I think is a great idea to do that. It avoids the calculator then. Okay, let's just move up my list of questions. Do you have formulae provided for ratio calculations? Sadly, you don't. So I'm afraid there it is a case of having to learn those ratios. If you are somebody that struggles with learning ratios, I think some of them are most certainly easier than others. However, so something like gross profit margin or operating profit margin, of course, is much easier than something like ROCE. However, ROCE comes up a lot. So what I would do is I would prioritize your learning based on what's been examined previously, what the commonly examined things are. And I think you'll find ROCE is quite a common one. Just moving up, in terms of ratio analysis, excuse me, is it better to give the answer in paragraph format or in points, in bullet points? Well, either is absolutely fine. But what I would say is you really need to make it easy for your marker to read. That's point number one. But point number two, I think it's a great idea to make your answer visually correspond to the number of marks going. So if there are, say, 8 marks going for discussing performance, try and make it clear that you have 8 things, 8 discussion points, which might be 8 bullet points, might be 8 short paragraphs. I think that's a really nice thing to do. The other thing that I would say is if you are using bullet points, and it tends to be a problem more with bullet points than paragraphs, if you're using bullet points, make sure you develop your point enough. Don't be tempted to just write something such as gross profit margins increased, because that is adding no value whatsoever. Even if you said gross profit margins improved, you're adding a little bit of value through your language. But what you really should be doing is pushing that on to say why it's improved, referencing the scenario, of course. So that's the problem with using bullets. Sometimes you don't write enough. For whatever reason, mentally, you don't write enough, so you must push yourself. Sometimes if you use paragraphs, the opposite's true, and you start to waffle and maybe repeat yourself. And again, that is absolutely not going to help you. So if you're going to use paragraphs, keep them short, sharp, and simple, and really, really easy to read. But either is fine. I've also been asked in that written section, in the analysis section, will you be penalised for grammar errors? Will you be penalised for spelling errors? And actually, the answer there is you won't be penalised at all, as long as the marker can understand what you've written. That's the key thing. So as long as you're getting your point across, don't worry about grammar or spelling errors. For OTQs, if they require two options, so which two of the following 5, whatever the question happens to be, do I get marks if I only tick one of them, or if I get one of them wrong? No, it's all or nothing here. So if it wants 2 responses, if it wants 2 items ticked, you have to tick or mark 2 items. And to get any marks at all in that question, they have to be the correct 2 items. So if you tick 2, one's right, one's wrong, you'll get no marks whatsoever. If you only tick 1 box, there's no way you can get any marks. So always make sure that even if you definitely know one of the answers, not sure about the other, don't leave it blank, make a guess, then there's always a chance. Okay. What are the main topics covered on section C? I think that's a really dangerous thing to almost second guess. I think if I just give you an example, if you think about it being an accounts prep question, it being consolidation, and that's the accounts prep question, you're going to miss out a whole raft of topics that could be examined here. In a single entity accounts prep question, the examiner could include adjustments which relate to revenue, leases, provisions, assets held for sale, you name it, financial instruments. So actually anything at all could be covered in section C. It's a little bit misleading to just think, oh, it's just accounts prep. It can't be all of those technical topics. It can be. And actually, we have in a consolidation question, we've seen financial instruments creep in. We've seen calculations for convertible debt required within a consolidation question. So actually, could be anything. Let me just scoot up my questions and see what else we've got. How should I answer my ratio questions using the scenario? It seems more difficult. I think when you are answering a ratio question, I think a great approach is to state a fact and then explain it. So it might be as simple as revenue has increased from year 1 to year 2. That's your fact. The marks are coming from explaining it though. Look at the scenario. Is there anything at all that would help you explain it? There might be an acquisition of another company. There might be a big new customer. They might have entered a new geographical market. Any tidbits like that you can use as your explanation. If there is absolutely nothing to use as your explanation, think sensibly what might have happened. So revenue has increased. This may be because there is a new customer. If there's literally nothing you can rely on in the scenario, provide some sort of feasible explanation anyway. The other thing, as well as stating a fact and explaining it, that's a really good way to access marks, is state a fact, explain it, and link it to something. So in the case I've just given you, revenues increased, you could link that to, for example, trade receivables has increased proportionately, or it might be disproportionately, but you can make the link across the financial statements. So fact plus explain, but within the structure that's driven by the question. So if the question relates to, let's say, position and performance, a heading for performance, a heading for position, if there are 12 marks going, I might be thinking I'll try for 6 marks on each, and then make your points, make your 6 points. So within the parameters really of the question requirements. If you are asked to calculate ratios in part A, it follows that in part B, you should be stating what's happened and explaining why in respect of those ratios. But don't be afraid to go outside the ratios. Don't be afraid to do what I've just done and refer to the pure figures, the revenue, the costs, the non-current assets, whatever it may be in the financials. But state, fact, explain. That's the way forward. Let's see. Section B, do you need to provide explanation or workings? No, that's exactly the same as I said for Section A, absolutely none whatsoever. So it's just computer marked, so no workings are going to be useful to you there. Any tips for financial liabilities, how to crack tough questions? What I'd actually say there, in terms of financial liabilities, if you're happier with financial assets, the amortized cost approach is exactly the same for financial liabilities as it is for financial assets. The calculations, you just have to turn your mindset around into we are paying a finance cost rather than receiving finance income. But if you wanted to ping in a more specific question, I could try to address that. Clarification on the difference between accounts prep and analysis question. So an accounts prep question is where you are asked to produce one or some of statement of financial position or consolidated, statement of profit or loss, possibly with other comprehensive income, maybe consolidated, statement of changes in equity sometimes creeps in as well. So that's an accounts prep question. You are actually preparing those from data provided to you. The data provided to you could be a parent and subsidiaries individual statements, so you're doing a consolidation, or it could be a trial balance and some adjustments. In an analysis question, you tend to be given the financial statements, and then you have to pull them apart really and discuss what's going on and why. So that's what I mean by those two terms really there. Will the exam question state the name of the standard? Will it state, for example, IAS 27, but not what it relates to? If the name of a standard is mentioned in an exam question, which actually then not that often, if I'm perfectly honest, but if the name of the standard is mentioned, it will be alongside the title. So it would be IAS 27 separate financial statements. Just to kind of turn that around though as well, that's hopefully answered that question, but just to turn it around, a question I do often get is, do I need to know the names and the numbers of the standards? Do I need to memorize those? And the answer to that one is no, absolutely not. You don't. You get no marks for quoting the name of a standard anywhere. How to get easy marks first in FR? Well, do you know what? To help you with that, I think some of those debrief videos, for example, for the mock, some of the technique videos from ACCA are going to help. But the easy marks are, for example, in a consolidation, adding together the parent plus the subsidiaries figures. So those will tend to, just that simple addition will tend to give you half a mark. So those are the easy marks, and then the harder marks are things like calculating and putting in place the unrealized profit, or calculating and putting in place the goodwill. Although having said that, if you're doing a goodwill calculation, there are easier marks within that too. So things like popping in the consideration that you've been told, or might be told the fair value of the NCI, popping that into the calculation. Just figures, numbers that you have been told that you just have to feed into the right place. Those are the easy marks. Right, let me just scan up. We've only got a couple of minutes, so I'm just going to try and find some different questions. Which should I attempt first, section A, B, or C? And that is entirely personal. You will all have a different approach that works for you. If you are still fathoming out your approach, have a go at some of those practice mock exams in different orders. So try doing section ABC, then try doing section C first, for example. It's very, very personal. Some people who don't start, I should say, with the MCQs because they find that they're a bit, quick fire, a bit panicky. They put them into a panic. Whereas those section C questions, you just have that bit longer just to digest, to think, to get really all over the question. Whereas other people would just prefer the quick fire approach of the section A's first. So have a go, really. When's a good time to start practicing without the books? do you know what? As soon as possible, because even if you're getting things wrong, you will learn from that. The best way to learn is from your mistakes. So as soon as possible would be my message there in terms of when to start practicing without the books, and use it, as I've said, as a learning exercise. When you get something wrong, learn from it, feed it back into your knowledge. Extra marks for presentation in section C questions? No, there aren't at all. Cash flow, does that appear in section C? Yes, it could do. You could see some cash flow. You could also see anything actually in sections A and B, don't forget as well, but it could crop up in section C. Can you use abbreviations? Yes, you can. Try and make abbreviations that are generally well known, things like NCI or FV for fair value. If it's your very personal abbreviation, I'd write it in full. I think I'm just about at the end now, so I think I'm going to bring Martin back in to wrap things up. Sorry if I've not answered your question. I've gone through as many as I possibly can there. Hi, Martin.
Thank you, Cara. Absolutely. That's pretty much all the time we had, but we still have a minute left, and I'm going to just request you. We have a number of questions regarding students who are resitting their FR exam. So if you have any quick words of advice to students who are resitting their exam, and maybe any final thoughts as we close the session.
I think for resitters, think about why you think you didn't get through last time. And for a few of you, I'd say it might be something to do with time management or technique. So concentrate really, really heavily on those two things. Be strict with yourself on time management and do as many practice papers, practice questions as you can to think about your technique, particularly in those section C questions. That would be my top tip.
All right. Thank you very much, Cara, for the very insightful session, and many thanks to everyone for joining us on this session today. We've mentioned a lot about the mock, so I just wanted to let you know that the FR mock for pre-September 2023 is currently available on the ACCA CBA practice platform, and you can access that beginning today on until the date of your exam. So do head over there and do that mock. In exam condition, you can access the marking guideline and self-mark, watch the debrief video, and pick up the lessons and incorporate them in your preparations. So that's all the time we had for today. I wish you the very best of luck and success in your upcoming exams.
Very best of luck from me too.
Thank you.